Good morning. As said, I'm Scott Kelleher from eBay Advertising. Really excited to be here this morning to talk about data. I know as an e-commerce platform, this is the area for us that we feel is most important in the advertising ecosystem. I'm betting there are some people who may have differing opinions, and I'm hoping we can at least have a lively conversation about that. So without further ado, I'd please like to welcome my co-panelists here up on the stage, Susie Deering, Steve Cabrone, and Randall Rothenberg. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So first and foremost, you guys have to know getting around New York during this week is a bit of a challenge. So deep breaths for everybody. We did make it. There were a couple heart attacks in the back of the room.
It was a little questionable there for a minute.
It was a little dicey, but that's okay. We're here. We've made it. If you guys don't mind, let's take just 2 seconds. Please introduce yourselves to our audience.
Great. I'm Susie Deering. I get the great pleasure of overseeing the marketing for both eBay and also our brand. And I'm thrilled to be here today and have this conversation, which I'm sure is not going to be one that's new to this audience, but I'm thrilled to have the time with this great panel.
I'm Steve Carbone, Chief Digital and Investment Officer for Mediacom in North America. So in that role, I'm responsible for all platforms and all digital partner deals and investments. I always tell my boss that maybe now's the time to remove the Chief Digital Officer title in the agency business because everything we do is digital, and there's really no need to be have a Chief Digital Officer anymore. So I kind of feel like I'm in a job that I'm trying to reinvent. But really the focus being on platforms and the focus being on investments, and obviously data becomes a big part of the job.
I'm Randall Rothenberg, and every beautiful mid-century modern or Art Deco tchotchke in my apartment I acquired from eBay.
Drop the mic.
And our work here is done.
But
Okay.
in my day job, when I'm not going over and buying Art Deco and mid-century modern tchotchkes off of eBay, I'm the CEO of the IEB, which is the industry body that develops through our IEB Tech Lab technical standards, and then best practices. We train, we teach, we certify professionals across various disciplines. We do market research and consumer research, and we work probably with every single person, or at least your companies in this audience.
Great. So I will be remiss if I don't remind everyone to check out the Slido app or slido.com. Please ask any questions that you'd like through there. We'll get them here in front of us, and at the end of the panel, hopefully we'll get a few minutes to answer a couple of them. So my goal, my mission for this is to make this a little bit more fun, a little bit less like serious heavy, because generally speaking, data is a little bit serious and heavy. So I want to open up with a little bit of a speed round. So I'm going to say something, and I would like you guys to respond and react. First thing that comes to your mind. No paragraphs, no soliloquies, none of that. Just the first thing that comes to your mind.
This is going to be scary.
This is.
Yes.
And so you guys all know.
I'm nervous.
None of these guys have seen these
first.
ahead of time. Susie, as the person to my left, you do in fact get to go first.
Great.
Let's go with multi-touch attribution.
Great.
Nice. I like this. This is going to go quick. I like it. Steve, which came first, media or creative?
Creative.
Oh, from the media guy. I like it.
True statement.
I want to answer that one. Can't I?
Not allowed.
One word. Go for it.
Media.
Okay, I like it. All right, Randall. Ad blockers.
Extortionists.
Awesome.
I knew this was going to be fun. I told you guys this was going to be fun. All right, Susie, you ready for next one?
I'm ready. It will be
Corporate
better
social
than
I have to,
responsibility.
I have to kind of feed the beast, though.
Of course.
Let me just specify.
Wait, you're
You
supposed
said
to be one word,
For
no
pay.
soliloquies.
For pay ad blockers or extortionists. Any ad blocker that a human being just wants to install, that's perfectly fine.
Okay. Corporate social responsibility.
A must.
Okay, good. Ready? John Wanamaker.
Brilliant.
All right, I like it. Good. Ready?
Much better in Jimmy Kimmel when he does Mad Libs.
No, you don't get his questions. You get your own questions. I spent a lot of time figuring this out. You get your own questions.
I would have said Philadelphia.
Isn't he
Okay.
breaking the rules?
He is.
Again. All right, you ready? Randall, this one is for you.
Okay.
CCPA.
Looming.
Okay. Oh, I like that.
Yes, it is.
That's a good word. I like that. All right, you ready? Last one. Then we'll get to some real stuff.
I hope this is one I really, really, really love. Go.
I'm pretty sure it is, actually.
Okay.
The Tennessee Volunteers.
Bad Orange.
Yes.
Go Dogs.
Okay, Steve, you ready? K2.
Great.
All right, good, I like it.
See, we have similar.
So Randall, for what it's worth, my actual last one for you was supposed to be home improvement. So, but now that we've gotten that out of the way
eBay.
already, eBay, right, that was what I was hoping
looked
for.
very clearly.
I'm not above fishing for a compliment. All right, so here's the last one for you, ready? Ajit Pai.
Oh, FCC.
So that's the one you decide to go neutral on? Everything else is...
Well, you said the first thing. It's you know, what else? It's good guy.
Okay.
I mean, I've met him. He's come to our board meetings.
Fair enough.
We like him. My head of public policy used to work for him.
One word, right, one word. That's
Oh,
fair.
sorry,
and you did
sorry.
actually, that's the funny part, is
Philadelphia.
this time you actually did follow the rules,
He
and I'm
did.
the one who asked
Yeah,
for
Right.
a
exactly.
little further.
It's off to a good start.
So next I'd like to ask a specific question for each of you guys, and then we'll go back around again and open it up for some broader topics. So Susie, again, as the person to my left, you get to go first. So as an ad organization, we at eBay love our first-party data. We think that our shoppers provide a really unique supply of it and all kinds of other interesting things. As a marketer, you have access to all of that first-party data, but then you have access to all the other data out in the ecosystem. How do you think about that balance, using your data plus other data to do something interesting?
Yeah, it's interesting because we have extremely rich data. In fact, it's so interesting because coming into the organization at eBay, one of the things that was the reason why I joined was because I said, hey, this is fantastic. There's this incredibly beloved brand that has amazing data at their fingertips. And there's so many brands right now that are struggling because they have amazing brands, but they don't have access to that type of richness and data. And I think the part for us on the first party side is it powers everything that we do because of the fact that we are a human technology powered company. And so that data comes back in and enriches what we're doing. But there's also places that we know we can help create additional value for our customers, not just across those touch points on our platforms, but making sure that we can add the additional, second party or third party data in there to just round that out for them. And I think, where this becomes extremely valuable is actually where we make the determination on that first party side, which is these are the things they're interested in, and determining what part of that data, what they're telling us no to. And I think that's the distinction that most companies struggle with right now, because you need to go through and kind of figure out how am I going to organize and activate my data.
Yep.
Having the data isn't always the challenge. Being able to truly activate that in a smart way, and where I think that we spend a lot more time is understanding how to activate the data, but also understand what the data is telling us not to do.
Yeah. Quick follow-up. Second
Yep.
and third party, which one do you go to next as you're thinking about this activation?
I think the immediate place that we go is third party, because there's a lot of things that we want to make sure just to refine and make more holistic as to who that customer is and understand that value exchange for them, and especially as we think about them across multiple platforms. But I think that the second party data to me is extremely valuable because obviously it's kind of the bridge between those two things and really can help, I think in some cases almost give you more of the true insight into how to activate more effectively. But look, I think the bigger challenge is when you put all of that together, it's what recipe that's the recipe going in. You need better understanding as to, hey, what am I trying to make? What am I trying to create? And make sure that all of those pieces come together as the right components or ingredients to the recipe you want to go build.
That's good. I like that idea about value exchange. I want to come back to that in a couple minutes. Steve, for you, the concept of data ownership at an agency historically resided in the research group. They were the data guys. Get me the data. Obviously, now that is not the case. Data has been democratized throughout. How have you managed that? How do you lead through it? How do you make sure best practices are being adhered to? What's your philosophy?
Yep, that's actually the fun part of being in an agency, right? Because that's where we get to be organic and be able to constantly reform and create. I would say, there's many different ways that that's happened. I'll lean into one specific example. Obviously, there's trainings and there's attrition and there's a lot of things that just happen naturally to create that type of talent coming into the agency. But I would say, luckily, Mediacom has had a great couple of years of growth in terms of winning and pitching new business.
Yep.
A lot of that business that we won were won on the concepts of data first. A very heavy emphasis of bringing data into the overall marketing part of their business to achieve their KPIs. Obviously, when we win that business, the only way we could service that is with the right type of talent to put in place to actually run that type of thinking and philosophy that we put forward in the pitch. So what we have now, and the part that looks totally normal is everybody's got the same titles, but when I'm out hiring an account lead for a new piece of business that's data-led, I just hired an account lead that's got a programmatic background.
Yep.
Right? So when I go hire a planner who's going to be the lead planner on the business, I just hired a planner that worked at Adobe and also worked at Oracle, so they know inside DMPs, they know how to plan inside of data to extract out to be able to work in that environment.
So little follow-up, how do you develop your already internal
Yep.
talent to keep them thinking in this new way?
Yeah, so in many cases we lean into our partners, and in some cases we have our own training programs. Google happens to be a great partner in that regard.
Yep.
We certified over 350 people inside of MediaCom last year to be programmatic and platform experts. They are now fully versed with a certificate in the hand. It's on their LinkedIn profile. They get value, we get value, our clients get value. Mm-hmm. So we have our own as well training platforms that we use globally.
Yep.
That just to take our people and constantly get them in that area. We have a lot of experts in the data space already, so they're able to obviously train and continue to move them forward. But between our partners and just between the new way that we're approaching hiring and the places that we're going, which are different, it's not just going to a competing agency and trying to find their account lead.
Yeah.
We're going to Adobe, we're going to Oracle, we're going to Google, we're going to Facebook.
Yeah, I want to just interject something really quick because I think it's important. When everybody thinks about data, I think very quickly they go, oh, the data analyst. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes because, in my opinion, every single one of us as marketers needs to understand some level of data.
Yep.
And I'd even go one step further, which is not necessarily just the data side of it, but understanding the questions in which to ask.
Yes.
Because I think if you start there, understanding more of the questions to ask, you can actually get better clarity of what answer you're looking for from maybe those that would be the analyst or the data person in the company. And I have to do a plug because I think that one of the other best places for a lot of this education is some of our associations. I think, ANA, I sit on the board for ANA, and it's something that we've taken on, all the CMOs, because, look, we're being challenged to have that information. And so, therefore, we're partnering together to figure out across all these companies, how do we better educate each other, and how do we better educate our organizations and teach them up?
Yep.
Just to follow on Susie's plug.
By the way, you see how well these guys follow directions, right? This was supposed to be the question.
Hey, you said fun.
Nope,
Just to
fair
follow
enough.
on the plug, there are more than, I think, 13,000 IEB certified digital sellers in the world, and data you're one of them.
I am one.
And data is an essential part of that program. We have a programmatic 360 training program, which I think more than 1,000 people have gone through just in the past 2 years. Same thing. That's for sellers, for buyers, for intermediaries. We have scores of those courses.
Yep.
And it's true. It's the ability to use that kind of training to get up to speed is essential, especially since data, this little four-letter word infuses everything we do in media and marketing and public life, for that matter.
Okay, that's a great transition to the question for you specifically. How do you, as the body that represents us into the larger political ecosystem, how do you fight Washington's quest for headlines and the super simple one, which is all data usage is bad? How do you fight that?
Well, I have to say that is not the experience we have in Washington at all. Going to Washington is, from a public policy standpoint, is actually one of the greater pleasures of my job. The senior staff in the Senate and the House, and certainly the regulatory agencies, are really good and really hardworking. Mm-hmm. That's number one. Number two, it is extraordinarily rare. I think I can count 2 times in the 13 years in the job where I've met people in any congressional office who were kind of, blindly hostile. Everybody is looking for solutions, and
Yep.
we have not met. I certainly have not met a single person in the regulatory sphere, at least in Washington, who has fallen prey to that kind of weird and just actually not weird, it's stupid demonization.
Yep.
Because they're smart enough to know that all industries and all companies with all industries are fueled by data. And they're smart enough to know that all companies in all industries are now dependent on the internet. And they're also smart enough to know that the internet is built on client-server architecture, which requires the transfer of data between clients and servers. What they're trying to wrestle with is how do you balance the very legitimate apprehensions and even fears around the actual or potential, I think it's more about potential misuses of data. How do you balance that with the need of businesses and industries and frankly civic institutions like epidemiology to have access to data that can allow innovation and competition to flourish.
Okay, so this is a good transition. So after the individuals, let's kind of open this up a little bit. We've talked before today in our prep about whose responsibility is to educate consumers on the ways that data is being used, the good and the bad, and then as we were just discussing before, how do you hold the different actors accountable? Because obviously everybody's partially responsible, but whose role is where, and then how do you hold everybody accountable?
Well, I'm going to jump in really quick because I think it's interesting that when we love this four-letter word that could truly be a four-letter word for many, and I think that what's interesting to me is it's something that's been in practice for a really long time.
Yep.
If you go back, I mean, there's a previous company that I was at that this was a conversation we were having 15 years ago, and it started with things like when you would go fill out a sweepstakes form and you would give over all of your personal information. And what were the protections that we were putting there? Direct mail coming to your house. And so I think that like most things in our industry, we're talking about it now on just a different scale and a different amplification. And so I think that we overcomplicate sometimes for the customer as to what it really is that if you go say to somebody, and I can tell you because I have this research from at least 15 years ago, hey, will you give me all of your personal data? Will you tell me how many children you have, where you live, what you're eating for breakfast, and everything else? What do you think the customer's going to say?
Sure.
No. They're going to say, no, I don't want to tell you that. Okay, hey, you want to play this game? You want this thing? You want to win this prize? You want to go here? You want whatever? Yeah. Here's what you need to fill out and give me that information. And then they go, oh, okay.
Do you think consumers understand better now than they used to what they're giving up, or do you think it's still up in the air?
I think, one, because we're not talking about the same customer that's grown up with this. You're talking about different customers coming in at different stages.
Yep.
And so I think that there's a big difference if you go have that conversation with, say, my mother, who, all of a sudden it'd be like, oh no, I hear all these bad things or whatever. But same conversation, if I tell her, well, guess what? When you go log in or when you go and open up your iPad and you're doing X, Y, and Z, and all of a sudden, you don't have access, it's not personal, you love these certain things and it's not allowing you to get there. She goes, well, that's a pain in the butt. You should already know that. The company should know me well enough. And I'm like, okay, there's an exchange for that. So, but I think that like I have a 20-year-old and I'm a 17-year-old, and it's interesting to me because they don't have this conversation. They're not talking about their data. And it's because in their minds, the shift has happened that there's already an exchange there. There's already an exchange. So I think back to your question of who owns this responsibility, it is on every single one of us. It's on me as a parent to explain. It's on me as an advertiser to protect the integrity of the eBay brand and to ensure that the brand is protecting our customers. That is the core of what my responsibility is to protect our customer. And I think educating that customer, I don't know that we have the right answer. We don't, because if we did, wow, we would have solved this challenge. But I do think we all, as different organizations, whether it's media partners, whether it's our publisher partners, whether it's associations, brands, we have to start to educate as to what it means and the value exchange and change the conversation of, will you share your data?
Yep.
It's what kind of experience do you want with my brand?
So it's interesting. So not to stick too much on this, and I want to get to this concept of a digital ID versus privacy and how that all plays in a hot second. But you mentioned corporate social responsibility earlier as being a must. How, and in partnership with your agencies and other messaging groups, how do you think about balancing those two pieces where you feel like I have to make the brand mean something and the value exchange for my consumers within that responsibility, the corporate social responsibility aspect, and making sure that you represent all of your consumers in that outreach?
Yeah, so here's what I would say. I think that sometimes we get caught up in the one-to-one.
Yep.
The one-to-one, and I always say this, like, it's not necessarily always about, hey, Susie, and one-to-one conversation. Where I think that our corporate responsibility is to also understand that right now there's more about communities and shared interest, and how are you making sure that you're connecting with those customers in a way that they feel that they're part of these communities and interest groups, or I have certain interests that I want to really dive into. And I think that ultimately for us is where, again, it's more about what the customer tells us that they don't want. It's more of what they're checking off and saying, I don't want this. I think that builds up more of our credibility from a corporate responsibility standpoint. Also, it's taking the protections, making sure I'm not putting my agency partners in a position that they aren't set up for success.
Yep.
It's the same thing that we have this conversation with our publishers all the time, because we're very clear. And again, we're learning along the way. I'm not saying that we, every single step we are doing it 100% right, but where we learn something, we go back in and we're reapplying that to make sure that we're being smarter and being consistent with our customers and what we're saying.
Okay, so let's pivot just a little bit off of that. Randall, I'm going to tip this one over to you quickly. So let's talk about the balance between digital privacy and digital ID. And right now, there's the browsers, the specific walled gardens are kind of the ones driving that conversation. How do you see that evolving for the future?
It's a very good question. I can tell you what we're proposing. Whether it happens or not, I don't know. But the IAB Tech Lab has come out with several posts recently proposing the idea that there be a universal, essentially public token, that we change the system we have now, which is an entirely privatized system of identity and privacy management that is essentially led by, let's say, 3 or 4 companies that are leading it based on competitive reasons for each other. So in effect, what we've done is we've subrogated the public interest to 4 or 5 competitive companies and determined that they're the ones who are going to set national or global privacy standards, even if that means that individuals won't be served, human beings, citizens, or businesses won't be served. And to go further down that line, as I told you, when we were discussing this on the phone, Apple is actually driving the bus. Apple has lost its competitive position in pretty much every segment it was competing. It lost its leadership in music to Spotify, leadership in video to Netflix and Amazon, leadership in mobile operating systems to Google. Well, what do all those competitors that have out-innovated it, what do they have in common? With the exception of Netflix, they're all partially or wholly advertising supported. So Apple is clearly going to war against advertising, using its browser as the leading edge of that war. Hey, it's perfectly legitimate for Apple to go out against advertising, perfectly legitimate, for Apple to set its own competitive rules. But do you want to actually sacrifice public policy to Apple's needs and everybody else's need to react to Apple?
Yep.
I mean, it seems kind of crazy. So what we've proposed through the Tech Lab is a public token that is essentially owned, an ID that is owned by the public and managed by some kind of consortium that involves governments, NGOs, industry bodies, and others. We've put that out as an idea, as a proposal to debate. And typically of these things, the Twitter sphere gets hold of it, and you get pulled to the absolute, polar opposites. And nobody actually wants to debate the substance of an interesting proposal.
So Steve, you sit in the middle, right? All the companies that Randall has just mentioned are people that you partner with closely. And as an agency, you're responsible for making recommendations back to your clients and kind of protecting their brands while at the same time staying on the forefront of what is possible and what's capable. How do you guys, you have to walk a pretty a pretty thin line through there.
Yes, it's. I mean, that is in essence our biggest challenge, right? I mean, you have all the walled gardens that we're trying to manage, and they're obviously a big part of our most of our clients' advertising campaigns. So, what is our job? We're not going to be able to break down the walled gardens, but if we can at least peek over those walls and be able to get our data in and be able to work with them in some way that's going to be in a compliant manner to get some data out, that becomes the kind of that tightrope that we try to manage for us to really, drive some level of impact. Because that, our biggest issue is, we all talk about the duopoly. It's really a triopoly between Amazon and Google and Facebook, and they are walled off. Mm-hmm. And when you're getting into a space of I'm trying to do audience buying and I'm trying to really get into an area and then where it could be deep learning with their audiences and my brands, that's where we hit a lot of the challenges. Yep. So our deeper relationships with them is helping us be able to peek over those walls and get some stuff out.
And to follow, to follow what Steve is saying, I mean, the real contest here is whether the internet, which was designed to be an open system, remains an open system, or whether it becomes controlled by a handful of walled entities, whether it becomes, in effect, just a series of walled entities in which there's no ability or very little ability to cross-pollinate.
Sure. It's amazing. What is old is new again, right? We're back to the days of AOL and the original walled garden.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that whole battle that goes back, it's like, there were the browser wars, there were the portal wars. Yep. Mm-hmm. Now it's the walled garden wars. And it's kind of the same battle that keeps recurs in other industries as well. I mean, going back through time, and the role of public policy here is to try and assure as level a playing field as possible so that competition can flourish to the greatest degree possible. That's what we're in business for. That's what the IAB stands for. We want more competition. We want more publishers. We want more technology companies. We want more marketers. We want more brands coming into existence. We want more retailers coming into existence because that's better for human beings.
Okay, so to kind of take it to the next step here is we have more and we have more and we have more. And I'm going to add to that this concept of technology, not just data, but the technology that gets access to the data, that stores the data, new fun places like clean rooms and all kinds of things like that. How do you guys, who obviously see everything that's out there, evaluate new data sources? Okay, you know what, this one will be additive, or you know what, this one's a little, not sure I buy that. And then similarly, how do you evaluate new types of technologies and what they're going to add to the ecosystem to really make that value exchange flourish?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, we have a pretty stringent criteria around that, right? And it obviously, all the stuff that goes into talking to the companies and getting MSAs in place and the right type of documentation to make sure all that stuff is lined up is one part of it. But the part about actually digging into their product, what data sources are they using? Where are they actually obtaining that data? Yep. Is that data including PII? Is it opted in? How have they opted it in? Is it with another third party? Diving down and going deep within all those different rabbit holes becomes a big part of what our compliance team does when we're analyzing any source. Because once we create a deal with that partner and we bring it to our client, if that's flawed, we create an issue for ourselves, we create an issue for our clients. So that's why that area itself of evaluation, that in itself, we have a whole department that's a full-time job, and that becomes a big part of what we do in terms of driving and helping support data strategy with our clients.
Yeah. Susie?
We have a data council, and our data council definitely reviews, and in fact, so everything that the agency partner is doing, then they get to come to the data council, and then it goes through a whole other review to ensure that from our protections, and it's interesting because that data council has probably some unusual suspects on that data council, meaning it's not just from a legal standpoint. You've got, obviously, marketing sitting on that council. We even have our buyer experiences team so that they're looking at it and understanding, when that comes through, if it's going to make sense, is there going to be any kind of trip up. So I think, I feel like this is probably the one space that for most brands, they're not prepared for because, one, especially if you're in your brand that you haven't had data, you're craving it, you don't know how to go necessarily build that type of rigor and counsel type of, understanding. When you're a company like us, that's how we were built from the ground up. I think it makes it a little bit easier in that aspect. But I think it's going to be one of the things that, they're going to look to more partners to help them with what some of that evaluation is.
Yep. Just as a separate thought on that one is, how do you think about the types of data, the new types of data coming in? Let's assume, for the sake of argument, they passed through Data Council, which I personally know is not the easiest thing in the world.
Nope.
It's been well vetted by everybody.
Don't need a quick turn.
Yeah.
You don't want that to be a quick turn.
No. How do you decide that this new type of data is actually going to be accretive and is going to add to the value exchange throughout? Like, how do you even think about, like, that's cute, but that's not going to help me in the slightest?
This is where I go, the questions up front make the difference. Because if you don't know what what are you trying to accomplish with the customer, or what are you trying to do? If you don't understand those questions going into it, then I don't know how you evaluate the output.
Yep.
So I think again, this is one of the places where I'd go. I think we maybe overcomplicate it. It's just like, okay, hey, if I understand the customer journey, if I understand what am I trying to do both from a business standpoint, and then also what am I trying to accomplish as it relates to the relationship I want with our customers, and going in and asking the right questions, then we'll start to tell you whether or not, is that helping? Is it additive? Am I just paying for another layer of data that's basically the same exact? And I would tell you, my feeling is we're paying for the same data over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And so 9 times out of 10, what I push to the teams is, look, go through and tell me, is it filtering anything that's going to tell us at the end of the day something different or new? If the answer is no, walk away.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, we're always looking at, agree with all of that. And quite frankly, the first question we always ask our planners once they bring 15 data sources to us and say we want to work with all 15 of them, it's like, tell me why,
Yes.
which one, these are your KPIs, which ones are totally lining up, this data source, how does that align to those KPIs? And then you wipe out half right off the start, right?
Yep.
So that becomes part one. But the other part, in terms of constantly also testing, learning, and applying, we see that there's diminishing returns at some point.
Yep.
You start hitting a negative ROI. Why? Because one extra data source did not do much. You added costs, you added all the expense, you added the overhead, and you didn't actually move the needle. So that constant learning back and forth, when you believe that this is a great source, that's why you test. It's an old concept, but it still works even in this world, because we're constantly measuring, are we hitting a negative ROI? That balance is really, it's key.
Yep. So quick reminder to everyone about the Slido app. We're starting to get a bunch of questions pouring in. And before we get too much longer, I will ask a couple of the questions that have been asked, but I'm going to warn everybody ahead of time. As the moderator, I'm reserving the last question for myself, so just FYI. So I'd like to turn to this one. I think that they've been bouncing up and down in terms of which ones have been most popular, but I'll start with the one on top right now, which says, privacy is a constitutional right, and research shows about 80% of ads don't work. Why do advertisers and marketers feel they're entitled to user data?
Can I take that?
Please, feel free.
It's meant for you.
By the way, in case you didn't notice, these two guys are both going, uh-oh. I hope this one's not coming my way.
It's such a stupid question. I mean, first of all, privacy is a constitutional right under certain circumstances.
Yes.
So Roe v. Wade established a right to it in terms of women's health. But that's not universal because, in fact, data collection is built into the Constitution as well through the Census Bureau. Governments are the largest collectors of user data, consumer data, and distributors of consumer data for commercial purposes in the world. So there's a balance on those rights. Research shows about 80% of ads don't work. Actually, it's probably much more than that, which is why there's such a high volume of advertising. And so, of course, you want to make the advertising more effective by making the media usage more effective, making the spend more effective. And why do advertisers and marketers feel they're entitled to user data? The phrase user data actually covers, I don't know, maybe a billion forms of activity. So advertisers certainly don't feel they're entitled to, knowing about your sexual activity in the bedroom, and they don't think. So it's just, to me, that's the kind of question, that's one of those polar questions that the Twitter sphere specializes in.
Yep.
Doesn't help actually anybody understand how do you balance the tensions between necessary public goods. There is a public good in consumers, human beings, citizens being able to exercise their franchise without fear of interference. There is also a public good in fostering innovation and competition in the economy. The real issues we should ask are not based on kind of dumb phraseology like that, but actually understanding how do we balance these tensions so we get the best goods for the greatest number of people.
Awesome. So I'm gonna. There was a
That's
question
not coming
that
from the
came
person who
through
asked the question.
about whether a pop-up is a great way to improve things. If it's possible to get that one back up, I would like to ask. There it is. Thank you. I was going to ask that one, but before we do, I like whoever our G is, because this is my kind of speed question. Really, a real fast one. The next question was, have you watched The Great Hack on Netflix?
On the plane, I will.
Okay, good one.
No, I have not.
No.
And that makes 4. So 4 for 4, but I do like the question for the quick, rapid response. Okay, so another question was asked, and I do like this one. How does a brand educate their consumer about data? Is an opt-in pop-up enough? I think it's a great question. I think there's everyone who reads those things. Let's be totally transparent about this. Who reads those? Nobody, right? They're really long. So how do you do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, I think it's about giving customers more. If I just let me go maybe, excuse me, one direction. On our homepage, we're constantly asking, is this helpful? No. I think in context, being able to put things in more context for the customer, because you're right, pop-ups, it basically says, who was the last time that you read a legal disclaimer on something? How many times did you read the thing that says, just check this, you've read your terms and conditions? I think that's too much onus to put on the customer. I also think that pop-ups become more interfering because they go, now I'm just mad at you because I was trying to get to this thing and you've interrupted it. So I think that there's, again, places, behavior, watch what your customers are doing and where they're actually interacting is going to probably tell us more than what they are necessarily clicking on and telling you.
Steve?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think in all the research that we've kind of seen, it's like, the only time the end user gets really upset about being overly personalized in a communication that comes back to them is if they don't know how that data was collected.
That's exactly right.
Right? When they know and they're immersed in a brand and they are providing that data, they expect that personalization. So I think as long as you obey those rules and you kind of treat that as anyone who's entering within your properties, within your sites, within your entities, you got to make sure that you let them know why you're asking certain questions, because the only time they really get upset is when they don't know.
Yeah, when it's unexpected.
When it's unexpected.
That's right.
Randall, anything?
I don't really have anything to add. It's actually a pretty complicated problem because people are generally coming onto mobile sites or to the degree they still are desktop sites, for a very specific purpose. Don't like to be interrupted. I agree with everything that Steve and Susie said. So you got to use real language. You shouldn't use legal language. You shouldn't hide behind what your lawyers do. But great. But people don't want to be faced with these pop-ups when they're trying to buy something. They're probably not going to go because only a minority go to the privacy policies. So how do you kind of balance user interests with the need to inform? And then take this now into the OTT space. For example, people are at home in front of their 65-inch Vizio, connected TV.
No plugs there at all. Okay.
And it's a connected TV. Yeah. It's got these data flows going back and forth. I'm going on to Netflix to watch The Big Hack. Do I want Netflix to start putting pop-ups in front of me, explaining how it's providing me, how it's collecting data in order to provide me the recommendations?
Yep.
So it's very situational, and I think we have to be realistic about it. Yeah.
Okay, so we have just a little bit of time left, and this isn't going to be quite the speed round, one-word sort of response, but keep it fairly simple.
Can I interrupt?
Of course, absolutely. What's your prediction for the next big thing in data? What's coming next?
Oh gosh, I think actually just it's more about executing on the data. Because I think that's still,
what does that mean?
Meaning, I don't think we have yet figured out the right technology at scale to help us truly take those insights that we're learning from data and make it back, connecting it from a true context perspective. Yep. And I think that's the next, I think there's things that are going into play, like we have right now, tools that we're using, but we're not being able to leverage it as aggressively on scale.
So is it about speed to using
Yes.
the insights? So getting
Yes.
to use the insights much faster.
Absolutely. And by the way, it's also from an advertiser standpoint, it's being able to then take creative and be able to take the scalability of those insights and put it into creative context at a faster pace.
Without getting too far to one-to-one, because you were saying
No,
before
that's
we went too far.
right. That's right. And so I think there's just I think we still have a lot to learn there from a measurement and understanding how do we do that at a quicker pace.
Yep.
But the context really matters. And then again, understanding that it doesn't need to always be one-to-one, and where are you making those decisions?
So the art is not leaving the art and science.
No, you got to have that. By the way, that's my other big challenge. We talk so much about data. The fact that we very often have neglected talking about the true creativity side of it
Yep.
really concerns me.
Okay.
Concerns me.
So when young kids ask me what they should do, should they go into advertising? First I say no, don't go into advertising. But I do say,
How?
I do say,
The best time to be in the business.
I do say go into data science, because data science, really, with all the data that's coming in the world and how it's going to need to be accessed and all the regulations to be part of it, we're going to need scientists to go into that data and pull out the nuggets and pull out the insights and pull out the stuff that we're going to need. And that's a very unique skill, and I believe we need data scientists.
So where do you find the artists?
Less marketing people.
Yeah,
to
see, I
work
think
with-
I would go it's the other direction. I think we need more on even the creative side. I think we need more from a technologist standpoint, because I do believe that the data scientists are absolutely critical, but I feel like we've put that front and forward. I think we aren't talking about enough as to how are we educating, or how are we preparing creatives to think differently about the context and the content.
Yep. Randall?
The next big thing is January with the implementation of California Consumer Privacy Act.
Yep.
Followed in July by the actual implementation. The Attorney General in California is required to come up with regulatory mechanisms by that point. So this is big. In between January and July, there'll probably be 3 or 4 other states that will introduce look-alike bills. And I think the really big thing that we should look for is how many companies, especially publishers, but also smaller digital retailers, will stop doing business in these states because they can't afford the compliance cost. We've already counted something on the order of 250 U.S. newspapers that are no longer distributing digitally in the European Union because they can't afford they've shut down.
Yep.
You can't access them in the EU because they decided that the compliance costs aren't worth the returns that they're getting. And you can kind of argue, okay, San Diego Tribune, does it really matter to them if they can't distribute digitally in Europe? But in aggregate, it actually means hundreds of U.S. newspapers aren't able to do business in a major territory. So we're looking to see what is that outlook going to be in California, what will it be in Texas, what will it be in Washington State is following on its heels. Albany may follow on its heels. So I think those are the next big things. And then after that,
I love the next big thing has a due date of January 1. Like,
Yeah.
no, the next big thing is 4 months from now. This is great.
That's
So, and then,
that's a good one.
after that, it'll be the federal bill that we're all anticipating that our coalition, Privacy for America, that's IEB, ANA, 4As, NAI, DAA are heavily behind, because we think there needs to be a federal baseline. Clearly, you can't have 50 states with 50 separate data and privacy laws, because I frankly don't understand how a SCOTUS blog, which covers the Supreme Court, is going to be able to comply with 50 different state laws. I don't understand how a Glossier Cosmetics is going to be able to comply with 50 state laws. I don't really worry too much about Facebook and Google. I worry a lot about Away Luggage, and I worry a lot about the San Diego Tribune and companies like that.
Well, this has been great. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
To our panelists.
Thank you.
It was awesome. Thank you.